Hello and welcome to English 2. I'm your online teacher, Miss Bear. We have been working on a Common Lit unit about the fashion industry, and at the end of this unit we will be doing an expository writing task. As you can see on your screen, our research question states, Frances Cabot Lowell had a utopian vision for a factory that would make profits for the owners while also improving the lives of the workers. What was his vision? And then to what extent has his vision been realized since its inception? And so over the course of this unit, we will be reading various texts so that we can answer this research question. So all of these texts that we're gathering, we are also gathering evidence to support our position in this expository writing task. So on our agenda today is how do we read a primary source? This particular lesson will introduce you to the differences between primary and secondary sources. It also will give you a framework for analyzing a writer's purpose and bias in a primary text. As a reminder, this is a Common Lit 360 unit, and it is their unit 4, the fashion industry, past to present. And today we will be doing a mini lesson on primary sources. You should have, or hopefully your teacher has printed you a copy of the worksheet from the Common Lit website that is reading a primary source. And so you will complete this as we go through the PowerPoint today. And then at the end of the day, there is a little activity. There's a part 2 and a part 3 that you will do together, some of it together and some of it you will do with a partner. So let's dig right into what are we going to learn? So on your screen, you're going to see a primary source, and we're going to learn what you need to consider when reading primary source documents. So you may ask yourself, what is a primary source? It is an immediate first-hand account of a topic from someone who was directly involved in it. So if you asked me about a car accident, and I was in the car when the accident happened, I was directly involved in the accident, right? Or if you asked me about a car accident that I saw on my way to work on the side of the road and it was already finished, there's different bits of information that I'm going to have that's dependent on my involvement in it and what involvement that I was in that. So when we think about a primary source, we think about people that have written diaries, letters, memoirs. We think about photographs and drawings, video and audio recordings, political cartoons, interviews with eyewitnesses, speeches and government documents, and then essays and autobiographies written by those who were there, right? And so if you're getting what we call a second-hand information, that would be if I was telling you what I saw after the fact of the car accident that I saw on the side of the road on my way to work. So primary and secondary, we're going to dig deeper into that today, but I want you to make a note of the different items that are on your screen for what specifically is a primary source. Make sure that you have all of those different ideas written down so that you can distinguish between a primary and a secondary source. So then let's dig a little bit closer into what a primary source is. In most of your classes, you often use what we call secondary sources. Those are the things that interpret or summarize information and are usually created by people who are not directly involved in the event. So your examples include textbooks, lectures, and documentaries. Now, understand that documentaries sometimes use excerpts from photos or primary sources, videos, all of those things. So a documentary can include primary sources, but a documentary in of itself is a secondary source. The videos and photos that they use in the documentary are primary sources. So keep that in mind and know those differences. So then how do you identify what a primary source is? So I want you to look on your screen and I want you to read the answers A through E And I want you to just in your head answer which of the following are primary sources. All right, now let's talk about those. So on your screen you see A, C, and D are all highlighted. Those are primary sources. They were made at the time of the event by people who were present at the event. And so that will help you. Now let's look at B and E. Those are both secondary sources that were made after the event by people who were not present. Okay? So then what are we going to learn by today in today's lesson and throughout this unit? We will be studying letters and memoirs, drawings, political cartoons, essays and biographies by those who were there. Specifically, those people who were there. And so when we are studying a primary source, we try to understand the point of view of the person who created the artifact. So to determine a point of view, we have to ask ourselves, who created this artifact? What do we know about this person? And who is the intended audience for this artifact? For example, in 1968, presidential candidate Robert Kennedy made a speech to the public in Los Angeles. So I want you to, with a neighbor, to think and share with your neighbor who created the artifact that's on your screen, the actual speech. And then what do we know about the person? Who is the intended audience for the artifact, the speech? And then how did the context most likely affect the content of the speech? So I'm going to pause for a minute and let you think and share with your partner. Good job. Now let's think about who created the artifact, right? Let's talk about that. So what do we know about this person? We know that Robert Kennedy wrote the speech when he was campaigning to be president of the United States. Okay, the intended audience are potential voters, those who will potentially vote for him. And then how did the context affect the content? Well, obviously Kennedy probably made himself sound good and listed reasons why he should be elected. And so he's not going to share the bad things about himself unless he's going to spin it in order to attract a different type of person that will be voting during that season. So typically you want to ask yourself those questions. And so all of those are on the handout that you have, and make sure that you are using that throughout the lesson and asking yourself who the targeted audience is and why the content affects the context. That's really important. So as we go through all of these different texts, we're going to be asking ourselves those questions about the Lowell Mills or the Lowell Mills. And so you see on your screen letters from mill girls. We've got part 1 and part 2. A week in the mill. All of these were written by people who were part of the mill. And as we ask these questions, that's going to help us understand the creator's attitude towards the Lowell system. Then we can decide how the creator's attitude affects the content. Now, I know that this was somewhat of a brief lesson, but it was still pretty in-depth. And so at this time, I want you to, with your class, to talk about primary sources and what the benefits are and the limitations of those various primary sources. So go back to your notes and talk about that and have that discussion with your partner or a small group. And then hopefully your teacher will also lead a whole group discussion after you've talked about that. And then when we are digging into these primary sources, you've got a better understanding of where these people are coming from and what their biases could potentially be. Until next time, happy learning.